Okay, so we're going to be talking about herd immunity and is it true? Is it false? Is it somewhere in between? Vaccine induced herd immunity is what we're going to be talking about. So, the idea of vaccine induced herd immunity is if 95% of us get vaccinated, then we protect that vulnerable 5% that can't get vaccinated or that are unvaccinated, fully unvaccinated. So, um, it, we're protecting the babies and the immune compromised individuals. Um, Something that happened with me is I have multiple autoimmune disorders, and the medical community was telling me I should get vaccinated because I have autoimmune disorders. They said, because you have autoimmune disorders, is why we feel that you should get vaccinated, that you are at risk. So I listened to them, and sad to say that I regret it. Um, Any rate, I decided to see, what's happening with this vaccine-induced herd immunity. Is it real? So, for me, I felt like it was fairly easy to figure out, and I encourage you to, do some critical thinking and decide for yourself if you agree with me or if you disagree with me, or maybe you have a whole nother idea about it. But the what I did was I simply just figured out how long did the vaccines last, and are people keeping up to date with their vaccines, um, and do the vaccines work? So do they last? Do they work? And are people complying? So people used to think that vaccines lasted a lifetime. Since then, people know better. I remember growing up for the DTaP vaccine. The consensus was that it lasted 10 years, that if you hadn't had your vaccine within 10 years, that you should get a booster. So now the consensus for the DTaP vaccine from several organizations that I've spoken with is that it lasts between 2 and 5 years. So the question is, is everyone going out and getting their blood checked every 6 months or every year to seeing if they need another booster? Or are they simply, getting a booster every 5 years? And from everything that I managed to look at, and also just from simply talking to individuals saying, when was the last time you got a DTaP vaccine? Or when was the last time you got an MMR vaccine? And a lot of people just couldn't even remember, they didn't know. So, if you need 95% of people to have these vaccines, I don't see that that's happening. And yet we don't have, all of these diseases, massive amounts of diseases running rampant. The other question is, so are people consistently getting them? And from everything that I managed to look at, the answer to that was no. So then the next question I wanted to ask was, does the vaccine work? And with some cases, it seemed like the vaccine does work. In some cases, it seemed like it doesn't work. And I'll give you an example of a situation that it would appear that the vaccine doesn't work. And it was in 2010, there was an outbreak of pertussis, and they blamed the outbreak on the unvaccinated. And so I looked for on PubMed, 2010 outbreak for pertussis, and it was 91% of the individuals that were vaccinated. That's right, 91% of the individuals were vaccinated, and 99% of them were unvaccinated. As I continued to read, the takeaway from it was that we needed to vaccinate babies more. Something along those lines. It was not, the conclusion was not what I thought it was going to be. But at any rate, 91% were vaccinated. I've also looked at different studies and articles in relation to measles, because a lot of people seem to be very fearful of measles here in the U.S. And you know, measles is very contagious. So, you know, every time there's a measles outbreak, you know, the whole world, you know, the U.S. goes crazy. So, I I've read some of these studies and articles, and something that surprised me was that the unvaccinated, for example, let's say you need 5 vaccines to be fully up to date, but if you had 4, you got thrown into the unvaccinated category. So I found that to be interesting. And, you know, if you're not, you know, going in, you're not reading the articles yourself, you're not reading the studies for yourself, you know, you could, you know, come to a different conclusion, you know. But even so, reading about the measles incidents, when you look at, even when they say vaccinated versus unvaccinated, it was more of them that were vaccinated. So it's just an example of the case of that the vaccines don't always work, even though that they, you know, were fully vaccinated for it. So, you know, this was the conclusion that I came to. I encourage you to do your own research and homework and see whether or not you agree with a theory of vaccine-induced herd immunity, or you disagree with a theory of vaccine-induced herd immunity. Look to see how long does the vaccine last, how many people are getting the vaccines, how long does it last in the body, and does it work? Something that I would like to leave with you is, so maybe you want to get vaccinated, maybe you don't want to get vaccinated. Some of you have a choice, some of you don't have a choice. But here's how many vaccines that you'll get from the age of, from the time you're born to the time you're 71. So if I was reading the information correct on the CDC, by the time you're 6 years old, you have to get 5 DTaP vaccines, and then let's say it lasts every 5 years. So if you're complying, then you will get 19 vaccines by the time that you're 71, and that's just with DTaP vaccines. So it's possible that it could only last a year in you, or a few months, or 2 years, or maybe you're lucky enough and it lasts 10 years in you. My point is that it varies. So what are you signing up for when you're signing up for the you know, the idea of a vaccine? The other thing I wanted to let you know is, for those that do not want to get their child vaccinated, I feel like where there's risk, there should be a choice. In the state of Virginia, you have a choice. You can do religious exemption. You don't have to have to have a special kind of religion. So you just kind of get a form and you have religious exemption. So it's very easy to do that. In 3 states, the state of California, Mississippi, and West Virginia, they've taken away the option to have religious exemption. I don't feel like that's okay. You know, and their argument is, we're doing it for the greater good. So something to consider is that people are injured from vaccines. It's not 1 in a million that are injured from vaccines, and I'll show you the information here in a minute. But something else to consider is there's never been a long-term double-blind placebo study done on a vaccine. So many people are surprised of that. And a lot of times when I tell people that there's never been a long-term double-blind placebo study done, for a lot of people, that's all I have to say. And they decide, you know, they've made their choice. But your choice, you know, that's what I'm for, is choice. The other thing is, you can't sue a vaccine company. You can't sue the vaccine company, vaccine manufacturer. There were, in 1986, there was a law that got passed, and I encourage you to look at what kind of spurred that. Why did there need to be a law that got passed? So you can't sue the vaccine company, the vaccine manufacturer, and in some states there is no choice. I believe in informed consent. So what that means is you learn the risks and you learn the benefits. Now, I would argue that you will never know all of the risks for a vaccine because there's never been a long-term double-blind placebo study done. And if you want to learn the risks, most of the time for the doctors, for instance, with the DTaP vaccine, they give you a vaccine information statement, something that kind of looks like this, and they'll say, this is your informed consent. And you can read on the back some of the side effects. For instance, like headaches, 3 or 4 in 10, there's vomiting and so forth. They don't state how long that these side effects will last. It could last a few moments. It could last the rest of your life. You could also look at the CDC's Pink Book to see. Again, for instance, 1 out of 50 child will have vomiting. So to me, that's a lot, and that's just vomiting. They go into seizures and talk about brain damage and everything else. You can also look at VAERS. This is an okay site to look at. They estimate that less than 1% of injuries are reported on VAERS. So, you could kind of do a theoretical probability to see how many injuries are happening every year. But for this year, it's, this is how the instance of these different injuries. So, then you can also look at the manufacturer's information and see what they have to say. This can be kind of hard to get. In some instances, they've denied me the manufacturer's information, but you can get it online, and you can also have the company give it to you. And I want to point out something that on this list, when there was solicited local adverse reactions or general adverse events that occurred within 15 days of post-vaccination for ages of 10 to 18, they looked at 3,032 people, and 51.2% of those had pain that prevented them from normal daily activity. So a little bit more than half had pain that prevented them from normal daily activity. And when I inquired about this to a pharmacist, they said, well, it only lasts a few days. It's rare that it lasts longer than that. And I said, thank you, and I walked away. I then called several pharmacists to ask, it says this, and you say it's rare that it happens more than a few days. How do you know this? And they said, well, they talked to the CDC, called the CDC, and they don't know how long it lasts. I call the manufacturer, they don't know how long it's going to last. So please don't just repeat sound bites, and do the homework yourself. So before you decide to get vaccinated or get your child vaccinated, ask yourself, how long will it last? Get the manufacturer's information to see what some of the side effects are, and know that you can't really do a true cost-benefit analysis, in my opinion, because there's not a long-term double-blind placebo study done. So you don't know how many, you don't know, if it's going to cause autoimmune disorders, for instance, in you or your child for the rest of your life. There's much that they don't know. And look to see, at the end of the day, are you more fearful of, all of the side effects, or are you more fearful of the disease? But just know that just because you get the vaccine doesn't necessarily means that the vaccine's actually going to translate into immunity against the disease. So that's a little side topic. So anyway, that's it. So think about for yourself if you believe in vaccine-induced herd immunity. That's what our topic was today. If you want to buy into the idea of it, the theory of vaccine-induced herd immunity, ask yourself how many vaccines you're going to sign up for the rest of your life, and how many other people are signing up for those, same amount or more vaccines. So, thanks.